Hello everyone, I'm Stephanie Soebbing from Quilt Addicts Anonymous, and you guys loved our mug rug video so much over the holidays that we decided we would bring you another one for Valentine's Day. This is the Valentine's Heart mug rug, and it's made using some scraps and then just some plain background, and it's really easy to make, and it's a really great project if you're trying to perfect those half square triangles and practice some free motion quilting stitches, and the pattern is free over at shop.quiltaxnomas.com. We do have kits for these two colorways. This one is using some Tulip Pink True Colors. We pulled out some of our collections of the pink and the purple, and then this was from a Figo line that we had over the summer that we've got just a little bit left of. You can see the prints a little bit bigger behind me, so make sure you head on over. I think these are kind of go very fast because they're really cute. And just so you know, we have changed our fulfillment processes, and we are now shipping things out much faster than we have been throughout the entire pandemic. So you should be able to get these and be able to whip them up by Valentine's Day if you order the day that this video comes out. So let's just get in and start this tutorial. Again, the pattern is free over at shop.quiltaxnomas.com. Now let's learn how to make these half square triangles. So the first thing we have to do is create some half square triangles from squares. This is my favorite way to do squares because you get two for the price of one, and they're super accurate. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our background square and we're going to line it up so that our ruler is going from tip to tip here. And then with my pen angling in towards that ruler, I mark from that center out. And I'm making sure to get right into those points. And I'm drawing this darker than you need to do it at home. You could just go over it once. But I'm making sure I'm going right into those points, because when we could teach in person pre-COVID, what I would notice is if they didn't mark right to the corner, a lot of times they wouldn't sew right to the corner, and then you end up with half square triangles that are a bit off. So it's best if you can take a little bit extra step here. Great task to do while you are doing some Netflix or whatever streaming service, since there's so many out there right now. All right, so now I'm going to place that right sides together with my print fabric, and I'm going to stitch down both sides of this drawn line. So typically when we're sewing, we're going to keep our presser foot even with the edge of the fabric. In this one, what we're going to do is we're going to keep it even with that center line that we drew, and we're going to go all the way down one side and then all the way down the other side. And if you're doing these, I recommend that you chain piece. It's going to make everything go a whole lot faster. So whenever I'm sewing any kind of triangle from square, I always use a scant 1/4 inch seam. So what that is it's a regular 1/4 inch seam that's just a little bit tinier. You achieve that by moving your needle width one needle width to the right. So I'm moving mine from 5.5 to 6.0, and that'll get me just a little bit tinier seam, give me a little bit extra wiggle room for when we're trimming these up. All right, so I'm going to line it up, just place that tip of the triangle or the square right underneath, and then I've got that line lined up with the right edge of my presser foot. Then I'm just going to go ahead and start sewing. Now when you get to the end and you can't hang on it anymore, what you want to do is just move your finger to the side, and that'll help you guide it. So you've got a really good 1/4 inch seam all the way down, because a lot of times if you end up with smiley or frowny face where your seam isn't straight, it's usually because you got off at that point. If you were chain piecing, you would just lift it up and slide your next one underneath. But when you get down to the end of the row, you're just going to pull it out. No need to clip those threads or anything. Just go ahead and start sewing down the other side. All right, so now we're just going to cut right down that line that we drew, and it doesn't matter if you're exactly on the line because we already have our accuracy from sewing a scant 1/4 inch seam on either side, but you don't want to be too close to that seam, otherwise your triangle could pop open with use, and since it's a mug rug, it might get washed a little more often because it might get a little dirty as you use it. All right, so now we have to press these open, and that will make for really flat seams. So about 99% of the time I quilt, I always press my seams open. I do that because it makes for really, really flat joins, especially when you have a lot of triangles. So I'm just going to give it a press from one side, and then I usually give it another press from the other side, from the right side, just to get it super, super flat. And I'm just going to go over that one more time because I was kind of talking through the other one. So what I do is I just kind of open that up with my fingertips first, then I put the nose of the iron straight down the center of that seam and just glide it down. And this allows me to get right in those points if I want to when I'm quilting without worrying about breaking any needles. right, we've got one more step before we can call this done. We have to trim this to size. So I always stand up when I trim. What that does, it gives me a little bit better view of the top of this. And what I'm looking for is making sure that my 45-degree line is going straight down that center seam. I don't want it cockeyed because then I'm never going to have this point in the corner, and so it's not going to turn out the way I want it. So what I'm going to do is get that in there first, and then I'm making sure that I've got a little bit of fabric hanging off past 2.5, both my measurement and over my ruler here. Now I always keep my pinky right here to the left. That helps me hold this ruler still and keep it from shifting while I'm working. So I'm going to go ahead and clip up to the side. And then I'm going to take those and move them out of the way. So now we see that our point is going straight up, which is exactly what we want. I'm going to go ahead and do a 180-degree flip. And now this time I'm lining up that 45-degree with that seam first, and then 2.5 on exactly on my left side and my bottom because we've already trimmed that. So now I'm going to go ahead and slice off my outsides. Now you can see here that we didn't really slice off that much, but if I'm going to compare it to the original, you can see that there is a marked difference in size and then also neatness. So in order to get really good joins and not have wavy blocks that are kind of bulky in places, this is a really critical step. So I know it's a little tedious and it's tempting to skip, but it's something you definitely want to do if you want to have really fabulous blocks. And especially with the mug rug, it's important to have everything lay nice and flat because you're going to be putting a drink on it. You don't want it to tip and wobble. So do take this step with all your half square triangles, then we'll be ready to sew our mug rug together. All right, through the magic of editing and a fabulous staff, I've already got a mug rug that's almost ready to go together here. But I've left or instructed my staff, actually I won't take credit for it, to leave the top row ready to go for me to sew together to show you how to join these and get really, really fabulous points. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to flip these guys right sides together because I'm going to sew those together first. I'm going to pin them. So whenever we're pinning open seams together, what I like to do is just kind of lift it up, and I'm going to kind of just make sure that those seams are right on top of each other. If you pull it back, they should really just be right on top of one another. And it's a lot easier to see when it's a block like this where you've got a clear white side and a clear pink side here. So that is always kind of fun. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a pin right there, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the other one. Now I really only leave these pins in until I've gotten a couple of stitches in because I don't want to stitch over those pins. You can break a needle that way, but I want to hold this together until I've got it stitched down and my needle remains down, because then that needle will kind of act like a pin and make sure I've got really great joins all the way down. So for the rest of this block, I'm just doing a regular 1/4-inch seam. We're done with that scant 1/4-inch seam business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and slide that underneath, and I'm going to just take a couple of stitches forward until I've got that whole first half of that seam allowance covered. Now I've got my needle down, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that pin. I'm safe to kind of keep it together. Then I'm going to line up my corners at the bottom and go ahead and stitch. So then when I can't hang on anymore because my hand is going to be underneath there, what I do is I just move my finger to the side to help guide and keep that 1/4-inch seam nice and straight all the way down. All right, so now I'm going to repeat with my other block. Now what I like to do at this point is lay everything back out to make sure I've got it where I want it to be. I'm going to put that there and this one here, and that's looking pretty good. I realize I've got my 2 hexes next together, my 2 minerals, but that's okay, it's fine. These are meant to be scrappy. You can mix every single one up and it's good to go. All right, so now I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to wait to press till I've got my whole row together to save a little time, make it a little more efficient. But I know that I've got everything where I want it, so I'm going to go ahead and pin and sew one more time for the center seam. All right, so for this one, we don't have that point at the top. We've got it way at the bottom. So I can just line those corners up, sew all the way down until I'm almost to that pin. Then I can pull that out and use that finger trick to sew the rest of the way down. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and press these seams open as well. You need to be a little bit more careful at this point. Just make sure that you're kind of lifting that iron up and pressing it down, because you got a lot of seams going on here, and we spent so much time making them really nice and pressing them open that we really don't want to accidentally press something going the wrong way. One final thing I really like to do, because I don't use steam in my iron, is use a spray mister. These are meant for hair salons. They turn any liquid into an aerosol spray. So I can just spritz that, and I don't get any water droplets. It just gives it a little bit of essentially what steam would do, but you don't have to worry about your iron spitting and getting nasty over time, because it's going to just get it nice and flat without gunking up your iron. So that looks really good. I got some really great seams. My points are just fabulous, exactly where they're supposed to be, because we took the time, we pressed it open, we trimmed it down. All right, I'm gonna give these a little press too, and then we're gonna sew our rows together to complete our top for our mug rug. All right, so now it's time to sew these together. I'm gonna go ahead and just get these guys right sides together. And this is a little bit longer seam, so you definitely can pin a little bit. What you'll wanna do is pin at the corners, because it's not so huge at this point. Then I'll also pin in the middle. And I'm already gonna flip this over, because when I sew, there is a little valley that's created where these little seams come together. And I wanna sew just to the right of where this teeny tiny little triangle is. And that'll make sure I don't lose any of my triangle points when I'm sewing them together. So I'm gonna put that to the side. That's my top row, it's ready to go. Now I'm gonna zoom in so you can see how I pin these using a 2-pinning method to make sure that you never have a triangle point amiss ever again. All right, so first I'm gonna go ahead and flip this one up and pin that, because then I can sew both sides at one time. I don't have to bring it back to the pressing board. And since this is a smaller piece, I can get it on there without worrying about accidentally stitching it in on the other half. All right, so now I'm gonna flip this over. And we're gonna get a little bit closer look at what I mean where these little valleys are. So you can see here that there is a little triangle that's made in that seam allowance. That's where we want to pin. So I'm going to put my pin in right in the center of that seam, right at the tip of that triangle. Then I'm going to find the same point on the triangle underneath, and they should be about 1/4 inch away from the edge of your seam if you've done it right. And so that way we should be able to stitch our 1/4 inch seam and everything should come together really well. So now I'm going to take a second pin and pinching that first one so it's going right up and down. I'm going to put the second pin in on the right side of that seam allowance, because when I sew, I'm going to sew this way, so I'll be able to stop with my needle down the first half of that seam allowance, the left side, and then I can keep on going. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that seam, because we've got it, or that pin, we've got it where it needs to be. Now this one, we do have a seam, but it's not a triangle, so that one we can just take and we can match up those seams just like we were doing for the corners, and just make sure they're right on top of each other. Get a little pin in there. Now I'm going to match up this point as well. Now the reason why I use a second pin instead of just rocking this one is if I were to rock this pin and just pin it, then I would shift my top piece forward and my bottom piece back in the process of doing that. Then my points wouldn't be lined up anymore and you wouldn't have as good of a joint. So this I found makes really, really great joints, especially when you pair it with pressing those seams open. All right, so now I'm ready to give this a sew, and I just want to show, now that we've got a closer bit, you can see where this little triangle is. I want to sew just one needle width to the side of where that teeny tiny triangle is, and that'll make sure I don't lose my point. All right, I'm slowing down as I'm coming to where those corners are, so I can be really deliberate about where I sew. All right, I've got that row done. I'm going to go ahead and put my second row. When you're doing this at home, you can make all the mug rugs at once, or as many as you want. You know, you don't have to just stop at 4 that the pattern's written for. And that way you can just chain stitch a bunch of these and make it go really fast. Again, slowing down to make sure that I'm right where I want to be. Get that pin out. Slow down again. That's a little busier joint, so it'll be a little harder to tell if you're a bit off. Now for this last part, I'm just gonna line up my corners. You could pin them ahead of time if you want. I like to just kind of do it as I'm sewing. All right, so if you remember, I pinned both sides of this. I don't want to sew it just yet. I've got to open it up a little bit. Otherwise, I'll stitch that in, and I don't want to do that. I am going to stitch though with my pointy side up, because that way I can tell where my little points are and I can make sure I don't lose that bottom point either. All right, so now I'm going to give this a press, and just like before when we were pressing the individual rows open, you just want to take your time and do a lot of lifting and pressing with that iron. That way you make sure that you are not accidentally pressing any of those triangle seams going a way you don't want them to go. And I always press for the back first and then the front. Then I take my spray mister and give that seam a little squirt and go over it one more time with the iron to get it really nice and flat. Now I'm going to repeat that with the other two seams I just sewed. All right, now I'm going to do that all one more time to join my top to my bottom. There is one difference when you're joining this row, and that's you've got your diagonal ones as well. So when you pin those, it's going to be the exact same process as when you were pinning your rows together. You're just going to start with that diagonal pin, and then you're going to work your way across, pinning and joining those seams. All right, so that's it. We've got our mug rug top together. It looks super cute. We didn't lose any of those triangles, so if that's something you've been struggling with, this might be a nice short project for you to practice with. But we're not going to stop here. I'm going to quilt it too and give you guys some ideas. Now you can always just do some walking foot quilting. That's totally an option. But we're going to do some free motion quilting using some full line stencils. I just want to show you a really cool thing about these stencils before I get going in the actual tutorial. So this stencil has been hanging around for about a year since we did a tutorial last year on the stencil, and it's a little wrinkly. So it is made from the same material that you would screen print from. So you can just take your iron, and do make sure it's clean first, because otherwise you will heat set any of the colored chalk on it. But I can just press it and that thing looks good as new. So if you get it in the mail and it's been creased a little bit in shipping, just take an iron to it and it'll make it a lot easier to do your stencil transfer on. You do want to let it cool though before you use it, because you don't want the heat to get on your chalk powder, because especially in the case of the colored stuff, it will heat set to your quilt and be there forever. So we don't want that to happen. So rather than cut my batting into the squares for the background, what I'm going to do so I can do this as easily and quickly as possible is I layered my entire strip across, and then I put my batting, scrap batting, right on top of that. Now I'm going to arrange my pieces just going up the strip. So I'm just laying that right in the middle, and I'm just going to work my way up, and you don't have to leave a ton of space in between, because you're just going to be going right on to the next one, so you don't need to waste a ton of quilting in between. Now I do have some safety pins that I'm going to use to get this in place, but first I'm going to mark it, and that way they're not in the way when I'm doing that process. So now this stencil is not quite the width, but it's close enough. So what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to kind of center it straight down my stencil, and that way it can just go straight up that center and it will look like I've quilted it fully. All right, I'm going to take my pounce pad, I'm going to bang it pretty good. This one's already been used quite a bit, so I don't need to fill it up. But if you were, you would just take this topper off, fill it with the chalk powder, and then you're going to bang it 50 times with the plastic part off against a hard surface. And I do mean bang it, like you're getting some aggression out. And then if you're filling it up for the first time, you're going to repeat that. If you're just refilling, you just have to do it the one time. But it should be pretty saturated. You can see how much pink is in this. And so now what you're going to do, and I'm actually going to go this way. Normally I have it facing away from me, but it will fall off the table if I do that. So I'm just going to grip it up at the top and swipe down. And since I just primed that, there is a lot of chalk. It normally doesn't look this intense. But I usually go over it maybe twice, and just holding that in place at the top will help it go through. Now before I pull this off, I like to pull up some corners and make sure that it transferred through, which it did here really well. and it did down here as well. So we're good to go. Now these registration marks are important because we're going to match those up. So you can see that little target there, and that's going to match up with this target on the other side. So you can see it started over here, and that's going to start right where we left off over there. So I can lift this up, and now I can take that target and kind of peel it back and just make sure that I'm right on top there. And then I'm just going to line up again so that I'm going right up the center of those blocks. So once you have it lined up, you can go ahead and repeat. Make sure to double check that it transferred well, and it could go a little more on that side. I'm going to give a few more bangs. Now I'm going to arrange it one more time, and that'll take me through the rest of the pass. Now I'm going to put just a couple pins in, and I'm going to make sure to do it like right in the middle of these big hearts. That way it's not going to be in the way, and I won't have to stop and pull them out constantly. I really just want maybe two a section, as I'm using cotton batting, so it's going to really stick to it really well. I just don't want the blocks to go all over the place as I'm quilting, because it's not like it's an entire like table runner that's all stuck together. It's 4 distinct mug rugs. Now, if you would like a specific video tutorial on quilting this specific stencil, we've got that, and we'll link it in the eye above and in the video description down below. But for this one, I'm just going to show you how you can really easily quilt all over the stencil and just go straight down in one swoop to save yourself a ton of time. So now the first thing I did was lower my feed dogs, and then I pulled my bobbin thread up to the top. And then I'm just going to stitch in place for a little bit. And then I'm just going to start following along that design. Oh, and I almost forgot my secret weapon, and that's to move my machine to the medium speed so I can press down a little further but still be nice and consistent. Alright, so I think it's super important to show you guys when I screw up too, because I know with editing and having quilted for over a decade, it's really easy to just make it look like I'm perfect and I don't screw it up. But I totally should have started with the work facing me, and instead, like, I couldn't see and I got totally off. So what I did was I just, made my own way to sort of fill in this first section. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it back around towards me. I'm going to pick up where I was supposed to leave off and kind of connect it somehow, and then I'm going to quilt the rest of this. Alright, so I've determined that right here where this heart starts is where I should have been coming out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect and just start my needle, put it down right there. So it looks like I'm just going to be coming out of that. There we go. So I've got my bobbin thread to the top. I'm going to go ahead and just start right here. I'm going to stitch in place a couple of times. That will lock those threads in place, and I'll just be able to clip them when I'm ready to go. Now I'm going to continue following the pattern, and now that I can see where I'm going because it's not behind me, it'll be much easier. Oh yeah, it's a lot easier when you can see where you're going. All right, I'm getting to the edge here, and I am going to quilt. I'm going to make sure I'm lifting up over this part. I am going to quilt on the lines that are just on the batting, because that's a really important part of making sure that you're working your way around well. And do be careful when you're going up and over that you don't miss anything. Because here it's really easy for that to just kind of get caught underneath, so I'm kind of making sure going nice and slow there. Alright, now I'm coming off again, and I am maintaining that quilting stitch just so that I can keep my rhythm and it'll look nice. And in this case, it goes over into this back area, so I want to make sure I keep that nice and fluid. So I really like how the quilting turned out on this, and I should tell you, it's definitely not perfect. There are places where at the beginning where I showed you where I started with it going in the wrong direction. I couldn't see where I was going, and I had to pick up and start again. You can tell that this heart is not perfect, but it still looks like a heart and it's cute, and you can just put your little mug right over that spot and no one will see. And there's parts over here where some of it had rubbed off on my shirt as I was quilting, and I was thinking I really probably should have used blue because that would have shown up a little better against all the pink. But you know what, by then I had kind of gotten the pattern down and it was back in my muscle memory, so I was kind of able to just make it work however it works. But this is a really good thing to practice on if you've been thinking about doing free motion quilting. This is a really cool part about this stuff. A lot of it will come off just as you're quilting. That dust will just kind of go away in the process of moving it under your machine. But then I just take my machiner's quilting gloves, and they do get, you know, they're turning pink. But you can also use a wet washcloth and just get it out of there. And the dust really, the powder goes away really, really well. And you do not see it again. It's not like a product that would come back later. Once it's gone for good. All right, so I'm going to take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to cut up the center of these, and then I'm going to add some binding to it, and then we will be ready to enjoy a nice little cup of hot cocoa with maybe a Valentine treat. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll show you the finished product. All right, so we have done it. We have completed our set of mug rugs. This is using the Tula Pink True Colors, the new ones. We pulled out some of the purple and the pink ones that are really pretty in there. And then we also have some Figo. This line came out over the summer. It's really pretty. It's got those reds and pinks in it as well. And the pattern, the way it's written, will allow for you to have scrappy binding. So you're going to use 4 different fabrics for your prints, and they are going to be in your heart, and then you'll have one different one in each of your bindings, so you can really make these just a little bit different. I really love how these turned out with the heart quilting on it. I think it's really cute, but I also really like how these turned out. One of my staffers did this one. They did just some nice walking foot quilting on the outside of the heart and the inside, and then when they did the binding, instead of doing stitch in the ditch, they used one of the decorative stitches to do just a little detail around there. It really turned out really cute. These would be fabulous to have a little coffee or a hot chocolate, and then a Valentine treat, whether it's some chocolate that you like or a cookie or a cupcake. I think it would be really cute, really sweet addition to your coffee table. The pattern is free. We've got kits with these fabric combinations while supplies last, and you should definitely go check that out over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Now, if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and like and subscribe. That way you don't miss any of the new ones. We know you guys love these mug rugs, so we're going to try and do a few more of those designs as the seasons change. And then also make sure you sign up for our emails over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. That way you'll be the first to know when new videos come out, and you also will know when we get new fabrics in, because we get really pretty stuff like this all the time. And this is actually just kind of what was left over from some projects that we did earlier in the year. So you can grab these goodies before everybody else. Thanks so much for following along. Make sure you head over and get that free pattern. It is called the Valentine Heart Mug Rug, and that's over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Thanks so much, and until next time, happy quilting.